Well, what's up, everybody? It is March 16th. It is Thursday, 9:17 on the East Coast, and we are back for another edition of the MMA Ratings Podcast. My name is Raphael Garcia, and I am here by myself tonight. I have not heard from my tag team partner, Schwan quite yet, but I'm sure he'll be here to jump in at any moment when he is available. So, yeah, what's up? We're here to talk about MMA down some of the things from this past weekend of action. Look forward to this coming weekend of action and just talk about some of the news. Maybe I'll talk about some of the IBJJF Pan American Championships that's going down this weekend. NCAA wrestling title championship is going down as well. Yeah, man, there's a lot of going. There's a lot of things going on. A lot I could sit here and talk about. But as always, first and foremost, I got hair in my mouth. I want to say thank you for um, listening to the show when you can, liking us, sharing, liking us on YouTube, sharing our content. I definitely appreciate y'all. I've been looking at some of our numbers the past few weeks, and our numbers are slowly climbing. They're slowly stabilizing, so that is definitely awesome. I just think that it is pretty cool to see that the show is finally growing, is growing in the right direction, but we can't do that without you guys. So I appreciate everyone who takes a moment to listen and like our content. But with that said, let's go ahead and look at we are talking about today. Let's see. First and foremost, let's see. We are talking about UFC Fight Night 106. And we're going to look at some of the fights from that night. We're going to look at UFC Fight Night 107, which is coming this weekend, and talk about some of the news from this past couple of days. So first and foremost, we have UFC Fight Night 106, where in the main event, Kelvin Gastelum got a solid win over Vitor Belfort. I wouldn't call this his biggest win of his career because I do think that the win over what the fuck was that guy's name? Tim Kennedy was much more important than this win, but it's still a win nonetheless. So what do we do now? Kelvin Gastelum is 24 years old. He's been set to fight Anderson Silva next. I'm not sure what event that was, but I did see the announcement earlier this week, and there's been a lot of conversation if that's the right move. Personally, I think it's a tough test for him because Anderson can still do some of the things that he was famous for. So just because he's getting up there in age and he is not the fighter he used to be, that doesn't mean he could be someone to take lightly. And it's funny because Yoel Romero and Vitor Belfort also called out Anderson Silva. So it's interesting to see that UFC decided to go with Gastelum, which I believe shows a clear path that they're trying to build up some of the talent on their roster. So, do I think that this is a bad move? No, I think it's the right move in the right direction. It's the right time for him to kind of face somebody, and he's looking good at middleweight. What's up, sir?
Hey, how's it going?
I am doing well, sir. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. You jumped in right on time because we just got started talking about UFC Fight Night 106, and we just got done talking about the main event. We did get that, excuse me. We just got started talking about the main event where Kelvin Gastelum got another win over Vitor Belfort. I'm not going to call it his biggest win because I think that win over Tim Kennedy was much more important, but it's still a solid win nonetheless. And now he's facing Anderson Silva in a few months. So what do you think about this, man? Talk to me about that win and what's next for the former tough champion.
The only reason I really considered a really good win, Alford looked really good. He fought really smart. He had like a game plan. He showed some flashes of athleticism. He showed some heart and some grit when he got dropped really bad in the first round. And Gastelum came down on him, was trying to finish. He was able to work his way back up to the feet, and he had his moments on the feet. Like he almost landed that spin kick. He was real close to it, and landed and won some exchanges on the feet. But eventually, the difference was Gastelum was so much younger. His timing was better. He was just faster overall. And it seems like at middleweight, it's hard to tell because he hasn't been fighting guys who've been really active, who have been on win streaks or in their prime. But it seems like at middleweight, he hits a whole lot harder than he did at welterweight, hitting anybody and people falling like that in welterweight, not without him landing, 4, 5, 6 shots in a row. Not this one shot and guys falling over like they got shot in the head, which is what happened to Belfort on 2 separate occasions. It's a good win for name value, and I see why he's doing it the way he is, because it's going to guarantee him big paydays. It's going to put him in front of the fans. Casual fans are going to know his name. They'd be more familiar with him if he can continue to win, and that opens up some opportunities for him at middleweight. And I really think he wants to drop back to welterweight, but I'm thinking he's just going to take what he can get right now, and hopefully build up his brand and kind of get it to the point where fans know him and relate to him and get behind him, so that maybe he can call his own shots like some other fighters have.
So, do you think that? What do you like? Is Gastelum growing on you? Because he's not. I'm not going to say he's growing on me. I was never a huge fan of him. I think he has some tools, and his weight cutting issues always bothered me. But it seems like moving up to 85 is finally it's the right move. He's still talking about welterweight. He needs to stop. Just go ahead and stop talking about welterweight, especially now that some commissions are trying to enact this new rule where they're not only taking 20% of your show money, they're taking 20% of your win money as well. So he might not want to think about missing weight again. Staying at middleweight, okay, let's do that. I like what he's doing. He's definitely talking more, and he made the right call out and calling out Anderson Silva. So what do you think the upside is of Kelvin Gastelum? How far can this guy really go?
Well, the upside is, just in the past 2 fights, if you exclude the fact he was fighting guys who are well past their prime and guys who hadn't had wins, and Kennedy had sat out for like a year, Belfort hasn't really won a fight in a couple of years. You take out those facts, he seems to be faster. He seems to be throwing more volume. He seems to hit a lot harder at weight class. So if what you knew of if you were impressed by what he was at welterweight, it seems like he's become a whole new fighter, a much more dynamic, a much more explosive, a much more offensive fighter at middleweight. And I'm not sure if that's actually true, or if that's just a matter of him facing 2 guys he knows don't have the athleticism or the recuperative abilities to fight and exchange with him. Because I didn't see this Kelvin Gastelum at welterweight against the better opposition at welterweight. He was tough. He put up good fights. He was always competitive. But I didn't see a guy who was so free with his combinations, and I didn't see a guy with devastating power. So I'm not sure if you attributed that to him moving up in weight, or you attribute that to who he's been facing. But I've been a fan of his skills. I think he's a good fighter. I think I've always thought he had potential. It's just like his lack of discipline concerned me, because as a fighter, it's almost inexcusable to miss weight that many times. It's gotten to the point where it's just a joke. And I agree with you. He should probably stay at middleweight, and I think he has some good opportunities at middleweight. But it's hard for me to really grasp how good he is and how dangerous he is, because he's been facing guys who are just almost tailor-made for him. Tim Kennedy's never been a great striker. He's not a great athlete. The only chance he had was to really take Gastelum down and work him over. But Gastelum's a good wrestler himself, and he was faster, quicker, more explosive. So that's going to be a hard thing to take him down. And then Gastelum's a way better striker than Kennedy. So when that fight was made, I wasn't really surprised by how that went. And him fighting Belfort, Belfort didn't blow him out in a quick burst of offense. He wasn't going to win that fight. He wasn't going to win it over 3 hard rounds. So it's really hard for me to gauge what to think of him, as he should be. He's doing it in dynamic fashion, but who fought either one of those guys beat him in dynamic fashion. So what does that really mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's business-wise, it's a good look, because it makes him look devastating. It gets people behind him. He's going to have the UFC machine behind him, because he's getting all these one-sided devastating wins. But I don't know what it means for him moving forward, because I still think with his height and his defense, I think he could have problems against bigger and longer opponents. I actually think it was a good move to call it Anderson Silva, but I actually think Anderson Silva can beat him. I really think Anderson Silva is going to give him some problems when he fights him, to be honest.
And you mentioned that it's good to call out Anderson Silva. Is he that guy now? Is he the guy that people are going to try to make a name off of?
Well, I mean, that's what you do. It's the same thing they do in boxing. It's what you do. You find faded contenders, faded champions, and you call them out because they have name recognition. That's going to bring in more crossover media, more crossover attention. In theory, since they're on the decline, you should win and win spectacularly. The good thing with fighting Anderson is, unlike Kennedy, Belfort, Anderson, even though he didn't look great against Bisping, him, and he did enough damage on Bisping where it was a competitive fight, and people, in hindsight now, after seeing what Bisping did to Rockhold, can look at that performance a different way. So that was a good performance. And then he fought Brunson, and even though some people say he lost, some people said he won, the fact of the matter is, a guy who's in his prime, who was a ranked middleweight, couldn't really take him down, landed and couldn't drop him or really hurt him, and he was afraid to pull the trigger and put pressure on his 40s now. So it makes Anderson look that much better because he's coming off a win over a ranked guy, and the last fight he had before that, he went tit for tat with the now current middleweight UFC middleweight champion. So by facing him, it should answer a few more questions because he's facing a guy who's not going to be afraid to pull the trigger, a guy who's still got a bit of a chin, and a guy who's got enough seasoning and veteran savvy, even with top contenders. So this win, if he fights Anderson and wins, while it won't prove that he's the best at middleweight, it will prove that he can compete because Anderson's shown that if nothing else, maybe he can't beat everybody at middleweight, but he's able to be competitive with them. So if Gastelum can beat him, be the first in my opinion, it'll be his first legitimate win at middleweight because the other two were over guys who hadn't had a win in like a year and a half. Beating a guy who's coming off a win, that means something. But I still argue the point that Anderson can get Gastelum. Gastelum is not really great with his defensive movements. His feet aren't really fast, and his head movement isn't really sharp. I really think that Anderson can counter him. I think Anderson can counter him and land something big. I'm not saying it's totally likely. I'm not saying he won't have to take some fire to get, but I really believe Anderson can catch him on the counter and finish him.
So I mean, like that's not. I definitely agree with you there. I think that it's a fight that Gastelum will be expected to win, but you never know.
I'm not expecting him to win. I know he should win.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He should win. Like on paper, we look at it and say, okay, this is a fight that he should win. However, we've seen crazier things happen in MMA. We've seen some foolishness go down, and this is another situation where we could see that happening again.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said, he's being smart though. He's playing it up. He's talking more. He's riding the wave, and I know he's getting a lot more attention than he ever got at welterweight. And he hasn't beat anybody who's either ranked or on a winning streak or had a win in a couple years. But he's getting more attention for these last two wins than he had over ranked guys at welterweight, and that's confusing in and of itself. But it shows that he's aware of the side of the times, and he's playing the game correctly from the business side. He's getting his name bigger. He's getting fights that aren't as challenging, and he's getting a chance to show off a different aspect of Kelvin Gastelum, the exciting, charismatic guy, the guy who's a destroyer, the guy who beats legends. He even had a little clever name for it. So he's playing the game right, but eventually at some point that game's going to have to stop, and we're going to have to see what he's about. And even though he's expected to be Anderson, I think Anderson's going to be the test. I think he has specific strategic and technical holes that Anderson can take advantage of. And if nothing else, even though some people think he didn't beat Brunson isn't a bad takedown guy. He had a hard time getting Anderson down. He's the big hitter. He hit Anderson. Anderson wasn't shook up when he hit him. And when he countered him, Brunson didn't want any more of that. So athletically speaking, Anderson's already beaten a guy who's bigger, stronger, faster, more dynamic than Gastelum. So it's a matter of if that Anderson still exists, I think he can take the damage. I think he can score the shots, and I think he can land a counter shot or a big knee or a big front kick or something of that nature that's going to put Gastelum away. And to be quite honest, even losing to Anderson is not going to hurt Gastelum per se. He'll just be his excuse to move back to welterweight. Well, I wasn't big enough. I'll just move back to welterweight. So either way, I'm sure he's got a plan out in his mind where he wins, regardless of whether he beats Anderson or not.
Yeah, like that's definitely some good breakdowns there, man. Let's move forward and look at some of the other things from the fight there. Keeps turning back the clock. Like he keeps turning back the clock. He had another big win. I mean, it was over Gian Vellante. It's kind of like, it is what it is. But when are we going to see the end of Shogun?
Personally, I think he's already ran out of time as an elite guy. And this was at light heavyweight, correct?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, light heavyweight, especially with all the cuts, light heavyweight is thin. They just don't have a lot of world class. It's like heavyweight. They have like maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 legit world class guys, and none of them can beat the actual champion, John Jones. But the thing about it, as long as you have Mauricio fighting guys who aren't world class or aren't elite, he's gonna have all the opportunities in the world to win, because these guys have athleticism, they have youth, but what they don't have is any sort of cage IQ, and they don't have enough depth in their skills to really put him in the positions necessary for you to beat him. Vellante is not a dynamic wrestler. He's not a high-level wrestler. He's not a guy who chains takedowns together. He's not a high-level striker. He doesn't put his strikes together very well. Athletically, he has some power, but he loads up too much. He telegraphs himself, and he's very limited in what he can throw. And above all else, he's got really bad cardio. I've never seen a fighter gas as often and as quickly as he does routinely. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a good win, because you don't expect Hua to be on this kind of streak. He's actually I think on a 3-fight win streak, which I heard off friend of the show, Connor Rebush from podcast Heavy Hands. He was talking about this is the first 3-fight win streak of Shogun's career in the UFC, which when I looked it up, I thought that was crazy. Like, a guy of his caliber has never put 3 fights together in his entire time that he's been in the UFC, and he's been in here for years. But the division he competes in is so weak, and the guys are so inexperienced and so limited technically, it allows somebody who still has power, who still has a chin, and a guy who's been a veteran of the sport for 10, 13 years, it allows him they have enough holes that his margin for error is a little bit wider, and that's the difference. Against an elite guy, he can't get away with those things. He'd have some moments, but he'd get taken down to finish, he'd get counter and finish, or he'd just get overwhelmed with volume. But against guys who are younger, but who are technically and physically limited, he's going to eat them up all day, every day. All he did was stay throwing counter shots. And Vellante had no answer for him. He's throwing the same right hand all fight long, and he hit Vellante with it all fight long. And Vellante had no concept of defensive measures. He had no idea of punching himself into a clinch and working for takedowns, setting up kicks with punches, using punches and set up takedowns. He just kept walking forward and getting beat up. And the worst part about it, his corner was telling him to make adjustments, and it's like he was unable to. I don't know if he didn't care to, he didn't want to, or he just didn't think to. He could not make an adjustment, and he just got picked apart by a guy who's just really so far on decline that he's like a shadow of his prime self. But I'm impressed, because I really expected that fight to go that way. I don't have a very high opinion of Vellante and his skill set as far as being a fighter. Like, he's got physical talent, but I've just never been a big fan of what he does and how he does it.
Were you thinking he was going to win that fight?
Shogun?
No, Vellante.
No, I don't have any faith in that dude. Like, I have no faith. He's fine as long as he's beating you up. In my opinion, and I'm sure he's a great guy, he's a brave guy because he's a fighter, but he's the kind of guy to me who he's fine when he's doing the pushing. The minute you push back, he folds up. So he's going to hit you. He's going to put some pressure on you. He's going to land some big shots. If you can handle what he has, if you can start putting some damage on him, he's going to fold every time. He's either going to gas and get tired and he's going to get out, or he's going to gas and get tired and get knocked out. If you look at his losses, they all follow that trend. Gas and get tired, get out, and get knocked out. Makes adjustments. He's not a guy who can dig, and from what I've seen, or actually seen in fights, dig deep and come back in a fight. Usually once it starts going bad, it continues to go bad until the fight's over. And that's exactly what happened. He had a few moments, and when Shogun started pushing back and put some heat on him, that was it. He just never recovered. He looked like he was lost on the feet. An attempt to bring the fight to any other level, he just kept walking forward, getting countered with the same shot over and over by a guy who's like 2 times slower than him and like probably 10 years older than him.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Do you think he gets cut after this win?
Given the fact that they cut much better fighters, I would think he's at least eligible to be cut, but I don't know how it operates anymore. I have no idea. I mean, if he was a couple years younger, I'd say he still has time and he has potential, but from what I've seen of him, I don't actually know why he's still in the UFC right now. Except they need guys at light heavyweight. I mean,
That's true.
who's the top guys he put win? He doesn't even beat the lower level guys to the level where he can be considered a mid card guy or a top level guy. You know, he's been given lots of opportunities. So I don't really know why they have him in here, anyways. And that's not a shot at him personally. That's just looking at the actual facts and win loss records and who he's lost to and who he's beat. If you're going by talent and what he's actually proven in the cage, why is he still have a job with the UFC? There's people with better records who don't have jobs with the. How does he still have one?
That's very true there, sir. That's very true. That's very true. Let's look at. I wanted to also talk about Edson Barbosa. First and foremost, we got to ask, how many times? What does Edson have to do to keep? Like this guy keeps getting highlight reel knockouts like it's nothing. Beneil Dariush may never shoot for another takedown in his life after that knee that he took that finished the fight. And it's what's interesting is there after that knockout, there's Mark Henry tweeted out some pictures and videos of Edson Barbosa training that exact or just drilling that exact knee over and over and over again. And it's funny because he overlaid it with the knockout from Saturday, and it's like 1-to-1. It's the perfect form and everything that he's been drilling over and over again. So it's amazing to see that. But man, that knockout was something stupid there. Is it time to start talking about Edson Barbosa in the interim lightweight title picture?
Well, I mean, Edson's always been in discussions as far as title fights and title contenders. He's got such dynamic skill on the feet in between the kicks and punches, and his athleticism is second to none. In the I mean, there's probably maybe 2 or 3 guys who might be better athletes than him in the UFC, if not in MMA as a whole. He's got power, he's got speed, he's got dexterity, he's got explosiveness. He's fairly physical, durable, and he's actually improved as far as his footwork, shots, and his counters. So to me, he's always been in the discussion for the lightweight championship. Being in discussion for the interim championship is he has another guy who's not too far off from possibly being considered himself. So that could cause some problems within the camp because who are they going to back, Alvarez or Barboza? You know, Eddie Alvarez is like a win away from being considered contender back for whoever wins the interim championship or being involved in the interim championship. And after that kind of win, Barbosa's got to be considered a possible contestant or participant championship fight. You know, the only thing he has against him is that he's already lost to Ferguson, and that's most likely who he'd be facing.
Yeah, that's a tough question. If that situation does come up and Barbosa does kind of crack through and is in the consideration for a title shot, I think I know how that decision would go. But I'm not gonna comment on that. But it would be an interesting situation to see who they decided to side with in that development. What's interesting is this whole lightweight division is pretty effed up right now. I wrote about this for ratings this week. It'll probably tomorrow, but the whole division is kind of like so spread thin. Telling who's going to go where. I mean, you have a champion that's either A, not going to fight because he's about to have a child, which is acceptable. B, he's not going to fight because he's trying to fight Floyd Mayweather, which is stupid. Or C, you have a situation where he's going to come back, but who is he going to come back against? Because he can very well talk his way into a fight with Tyron Woodley. So this division is really effed up, and while people support what Conor McGregor does, I get it. He gets people excited for big fights. He completely disrupts divisions such as this one, and now this whole group is in a pretty big holding pattern.
I like that everybody's doing is instead of talking about him now that he's out of the picture, people mention him. But the thing that I like that they're doing is they're talking about how they can get and they're talking about making fights opportunities. One of the biggest problems all these guys had about Conor McGregor. And I know people bring him up. If somebody brings him up, sure, you have that discussion. But these guys are just bringing him up out of the blue, gives him the power and cheapens your position. As Conor McGregor is not always talking about Edson Barboza. He talks about everybody the same, but all these other guys, Conor McGregor, I want Conor. You're giving him that. Not only is he saying he's the cash cow and he's the biggest name in MMA, your major contender who could be up for an interim belt, McGregor, who's going to be boxing. Like, no matter, people bring him up, people don't. Oh, I'm not coward like Conor McGregor. Don't focus on him. The goal is to be the champion, fight for that interim championship. If he comes back, you'll get the first shot at him. If he doesn't, eventually you'll become again. The main thing you need to do is focus on your career, focus on the opportunities in front of you, not spend so much time talking about him, because Conor's already beat his Hall of Famers and his multiple championships in the UFC. And he's not focused on any of y'all. He's focused on making money and making history now that most of the fighters in the lightweight division are focused on moving forward and earning their own money. That's the thing I like best about it, because they're taking back some of the power and taking control of their careers by and not mentioning Conor McGregor in every other sentence. I know he's popular. I know people care about him, but at some point you got to let that go so that you can make yourself and what you're doing the focus instead of what he's doing or what he's not doing being the focus.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because there's this Twitter troll that every time there's a new Floyd Mayweather says this or Conor McGregor says this story, he tweets it at me because I wrote about the fact that I don't think McGregor and Mayweather is going to happen. Still no. They've been talking about this for about a year and a half now, and I think it's going to go the way of the Manny Pacquiao whole situation. But it's funny because this troll keeps tweeting me every time someone brings it up, and I'm like, this guy just needs to go away. But I still want to see a signed contract. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the guys who are fighting. So Edson Barboza, who would you want to see him face next?
I'm not and as many improvements as he made, and as dynamic as that finish is, I'm sure you noticed this, and I'm sure if I noticed this in that fight, he was actually getting.
They're breaking up pretty badly. Like every second word you say is kind of breaking up. So you might want to kind of reconnect there.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you better.
Okay. The thing about it was Edson was losing that fight. He wasn't actually winning, and that should be a big concern for him, because there's a blueprint out on how to beat Edson Barboza. You can't strike with him at range and outpoint him and outslick him. You can't just walk in on him and try to run him over with physicality. Every time he fires at you, you counter right back. You fire right back on him. You can back him up. You can take away some of that movement, and you can put combinations together on him. Tony Ferguson beat him. That's how Michael Johnson was beat him, and that's how Daniil him up into the point of that flying knee. Now I know they rehearsed that knee. I know they worked on it. I know they set it up the way they wanted to. That knee was based on his size, his athleticism. 95% of the fighters in the world couldn't pull that knee off under those circumstances, because he's obviously very skilled, but also because he's such a dynamic athlete, and Beneil Dariush is not a dynamic athlete. He's not particularly fast, strong, or explosive. So in that half second or a quarter of a second it took for him to go from landing that stiff jab, pushing Barboza's head back, and transition into that takedown, Barboza's knee was already there to meet him. If he's a little bit faster, a little bit dynamic, more with his feet exposed into that jab, and transitions that takedown, he might get it. Or maybe that jab throws Barboza off balance, so then when he shoots, the knee. But Dariush doesn't have any of those physical skills. And that brief period of time between when he landed that jab and he went for that takedown was the difference. And even though they expected the takedown, they felt it was coming, there's lots of times guys know takedowns are coming, and they don't land these with that kind of power or that kind of precision. At a certain point, it stops being about skill and strategy, and it becomes about your ability to execute physically. Executes more effectively and consistently, because nobody has that dynamic skill and that dynamic physical ability, that speed, that explosiveness. And my question for him is, there's a lot of guys, for him to actually get into the title fight again, title picture, the guys he would be fighting, maybe Diaz are all guys who can follow that game plan. They are long, they're active, they can put pressure on him, they can take shots, they can put a lot of volume on him. Secret to beating him in every instance. He fires, you fire right back. You stay right on him. You make him work. You can work him over to a decision, or if you get it enough, and you can put shots together and put him away. So I'm not quite sure who I want him to face as far as increasing his chances to win. I would like to see him fight somebody like a Dustin Poirier, but Dustin Poirier is fighting Eddie Alvarez. I would like to see him fight Eddie Alvarez, but I don't think that's going to happen either. Him getting a shot that leaves Tony Ferguson and maybe Nate Diaz. And Nate Diaz isn't fighting Edson Barboza, so the only other option he has is maybe getting a fight with Tony Ferguson. Fight I see that makes sense for him. That's actually available for him to get right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what's next with Edson. I'm not sure where this kind of division goes from here, but I think a lot of it includes him in a conversation. There was also another interesting fight from Saturday, and that was Ray Borg and Josiah De Silva. It was a pretty good fight. A lot of good grappling transitions, a lot of good movement. What did you think of this bout here? And what's interesting is like Ray Borg is someone I've kind of watched within 125. Where do you think this guy's going to go? Is he someone that we can see as a potential challenger in the future, or is he just someone that's going to bubble up and then get bumped back down, bubble up and then get bumped back down?
I really don't know what to make of Borg. I was really interested in getting your take on him because I just don't know what to make of him. This is a really good win over. UCA has been so hit or miss. He was supposed to be the guy who was going to come into the division and challenge DJ. So up and down. So I don't know if this is just a matter of Borg turning a corner, athlete and fighter he is, and he's becoming, or is it just a matter of Josiah not mentally being checked in and Price as a result of it once again? I mean, did you see him making? Did you feel he was performing the way he wanted to perform, and Borg was just able one step ahead of him, or did he look like he were just not locked in when he?
Yeah, like that's the thing about the Silva man. He's someone that I thought that was going to be a real title challenge. I was excited when he signed, but he just kind of hasn't panned out.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, he's faced world-class competition. He's lots of wins. He's got experience, but sometimes I see him fight, and he seems like a guy who doesn't know how to react or know how to handle certain things. And a guy with his experience and his talent in other combat sports, you would think he'd be more comfortable and he'd be more prepared in a variety of situations. And that just hasn't been the case. It's like when you shut down one aspect of his game, it's almost like he falls apart. And that's amazing to me. Like, I just didn't expect that from a guy who came in, who had his kind of caliber and his kind of accomplishments. So I really don't know what to make of it when he loses, or what to make of it in him losing this fight. Like I said, I don't know if this makes Borg a legitimate contender, or this just tells me that who we thought he was when he came into the UFC. You know, that's really the question. Is he really that talented, and the guys in the UFC are just that much better, or is he never that good? And all these wins guys have over him just don't really carry a lot of weight because he was just an overhyped prospect.
Yeah, I wouldn't call even when he came in. I don't even think he was a prospect. I'm not gonna call him overhyped, but I don't think he was a prospect at that point anymore. But you know, it's still. I think it's you know he's past the point of thinking that he'll kind of bubble to the point where he's going to be a title champion, or excuse me, title challenger.
Yeah, I don't know that he has a job in the UFC much longer. I mean, to be honest, he's just so inconsistent. I don't know what the purpose of keeping him around. Nobody would, even if he wins the next 2 or 3 in a row, nobody would consider him a viable challenger to Demetrius Johnson. And I don't know that he can win 2 or 3 in a row in the division. Given who he'd have to beat, he'd have to get rematches and win all those. And given what he's shown us recently, I don't know that he could win any of those fights that he's lost to the guys he's already lost to. So I don't know what to make of. I don't know that he's going to be in the UFC that much longer. And as a result of not knowing what to make of him, I don't know what to make of Ray Borg. I just know he's an athletic guy who's aggressive and who seems to be improving as far as his fight IQ and his technical skill set. But I don't know how good he's getting because this is a big win for him, but it's over a guy who just can't seem to put it together consistently.
So, what else from UFC Fight Night 106 stood out and caught your eye?
The bantamweight fight between Betch and Marion Renault, just because it was two top 10 ranked bantamweights, and whoever would have won that fight, given the nature of the division, could have very well been in line to possibly fight a Sarah McMahon for a number one contender spot, or depending on if somebody got injured, might have been considered for a versus whoever wins between Valentina and Amanda Nunes. But being that it was a draw, that kind of just sets the division, puts both of them in hold and kind of keeps the division from taking yet another step forward. Because in that division, it's thin and they don't have any real stars, so they're trying to find people with new matchups and interesting matchups to kind of their contendership or develop a new opponent for the champion. And this was a fight that could have played big in that because, as you know, Betch, she's not famous so much as she's maybe infamous, but she knows how to play the crowd. She knows how to push a storyline. She knows how to when she's not a particularly dynamic or exciting fighter. And they're looking for people who know how to do that. They're looking for people who can create interest, whatever star, or may help assist other fighters or help assist their champion in becoming a star. So Betch winning probably would have been better for the UFC as far as the storylines and getting casual fans' interest and getting even hardcores who aren't really into women's MMA's interest per se. But like I said, there was a draw, so now the division's kind of once again stuck in a circle, and we don't have too many real legitimate contenders or people who are positioned to be contenders for the title. Sarah McMahon hasn't beaten enough top girls. Raquel Pennington needs to win at least one or two name wins. Juliana Pena just lost the fight. Betch and Marion had a draw, so they've either got to have a rematch or they've got to beat at least one or two other people to be considered potential title challengers. So it's like kind of put the division right back in a holding pattern again.
Definitely does. So let's look forward to 107, which is this weekend, which I'm not, I was going to make a disparaging comment about the main event here with Jimmy Manuwa and Corey Anderson. But let's just say this might be a weekend of fights that I miss. Yeah, because it just doesn't. This card harkens back to the fact that the UFC has so many shows on the docket that really difficult to kind of keep up. Talk to me about this card here. Is there anything that really makes you want to sit down and watch UFC Fight Night 107?
It's one of those cards where you watch it. You might watch it just as a fan of MMA. It doesn't have any matchups that scream at you and say that, I need to watch this fight. This is something that I can't miss out because it's going to in the direction of determine the next challenger. Jimmy Manuwa has been hit or miss since he's come into the UFC. A lot of misses, occasional hits. When he wins, it's dynamic. When he loses, it's dynamic. But he's not anywhere near a staple of the division or staple in MMA. Corey Anderson has got a lot of tools and he's got a lot of ability. I personally think they're trying to set this up as a showcase fight for him. Like he can win this fight and kind of get some, and then kind of have him face the next level of light heavyweight in division. For Corey Anderson, I think the UFC would prefer Corey Anderson to win this fight. I think everybody knows what Jimmy Manuwa is and what he has as a fighter, and the question mark and the guy with the most potential and the most upside would be Corey Anderson. He's the one who's got the upside. He's the guy that. So I think this is supposed to be a showcase fight for him. Manuwa was athletic. He's talented to a certain degree, but he's just not a very good fighter, in my opinion. And the only guys he's beaten really aren't all that great fighters themselves. So it's like one of the situations where if Anderson loses, that tells me a lot more about Anderson than it tells me anything about Jimmy Manoa.
Yeah.
There's
Both of
only
these guys are kind of are in kind of like that mid tier position, and I think the UFC needs someone. There's not even that if they want someone, they need someone to move up to a more advancing position because 205 is quickly becoming 205 is quickly becoming a very desolate and barren division. Even when John Jones comes back, there really isn't much to talk about in that group outside of Anthony Johnson, Daniel Cormier, and Jones. Uh, Shakurnoff, what does he fight at? Does he fight at 205 or heavyweight?
205, I recall. Yeah, 205.
Yeah, he's someone that is worth keeping an eye out on. But other than those guys, man, it's really like, what are we going to do with this weight class?
Yeah, there's not much talent. And they haven't brought any young talent. The talent they have, all the top 10 guys are guys who've been around for a long time. Cormier's older. Johnson's not really old, but he's not exactly a young guy either. John Jones isn't young either. He's not old, but once again, he's not exactly a young guy either. There's not a lot of exciting, sellable matchups. So they're trying to develop new stars. They're trying to bring guys up. But as I said earlier, when discussing light heavyweight division, so many of these guys are so tragically flawed physically or technically that these seasoned veterans, even the ones who are on the decline, like Lyoto Teixeira, Shogun Rua, are able to knock them off and set them back, to where they have to start all over and try and pick up momentum. So it's a really hard division to make. It's really hard division to make important fights for. And it's really hard division to make fights that people care about. So it's just one of those divisions that kind of curse in that way. The most exciting thing about it is what John Jones does and what he does outside the cage. And even when he comes back, he's beaten almost everybody in the division who matters, who's ranked, except for Anthony Johnson. And if Anthony Johnson can't get past Daniel Cormier, nobody's going to want to see that fight either. So you question how long John Jones is going to stay in there because there's really not much of a demand for the division, and there's not much of a demand for the people, for any individual fighter in the division. Nobody's somebody who draws eyes or draws money or draws rating. So I don't really know what to make of it, to be quite honest. Like I said, this is just another fight, and they're hoping that Corey Anderson wins so they can possibly develop a guy for the future. If Manoa wins, it's not the worst thing ever, but he's a guy. We already know what he's about. We know what he can do, what he can't.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely very true there. There's some guys fighting on the card who I'm impressed by and I want to see, but the fight that really draws my attention would be Gunnar Nelson versus Alan Jabouin. That's actually a very good co. It could probably be a co-main event on a pay-per-view or on a stronger card, and it probably should be the main event, to be quite honest, as far as the skill level of the guys involved and what they've accomplished in the UFC and outside of it. That's actually the fight I was going to bring up next, because that fight is something that kind of stood out and caught my eye there. What do you think about this fight here? Because I think it's definitely a big fight for both men, because it's an opportunity for one of them to kind of I think they're kind of in the lower tier of the welterweight division. This is a fight where each one of them can kind of move up and find themselves in a position to get better opportunities and better paydays.
For Jabouin, this is what he wanted. I mean, like you said, the main goal, and for any combat sports athlete, we always say it's about being the best and all that stuff, and I'm sure that's a part of it. But since this is a job and it's a business, the main thing is to expand your brand, to fight tougher opponents so you can get better paydays and hopefully better opportunities moving forward. For Jabouin, this is what that is. He's getting a guy who's been in the UFC for a while, who's ranked, and a guy who is a name in the division, and that's what he wanted. He wanted a chance to prove that he's one of the better guys in the division. After that win over Mike Perry, he said, I want somebody who's ranked high. I want a chance to show that I can be considered as a legitimate contender in the division, if not a main contender, a fringe one. And so he asked for it, and the UFC gave him what he wanted. They're giving him Gunnar Nelson. And I actually think it's a pretty good matchup for him, because Nelson, he's a good athlete. He's got a lot of athleticism. He's great on the ground, as I'm sure you know. He's a dynamic, very well-versed grappler. The fact that he went so many rounds with Damian Maia, even though he got dominated and spend that much time on the ground with Maia and not get finished, shows that you're a certain caliber grappler in and of itself. My concerns for him is that he uses that karate style which is effective because he's very accurate with his shots. He's very efficient, and he kind of sneaks in with that shifting footwork. But the problem is he doesn't have a lot of good boxing skills. He's like Stephen Thompson, like Stephen Wright told us, he's really his karate is effective because he's so effective with his boxing in the pocket. Gunnar Nelson doesn't have that. He doesn't have any solid defense or offense or counters in the pocket. He essentially just navigates distance, coming in and coming out, mostly on straight lines, occasionally on these slight angles where he lands like a kick punch combination or a front kick straight punch combination, really short combinations, and he either ties you up for takedowns or he lands the shots, gets in, and gets right out. And he uses that timing and distance management to get in without getting countered. He doesn't really have defense as far as defending strikes and defending, especially punches. He doesn't have defense. His whole defense is managing distance. And Joe Buen is a big, long, physical guy who hits really hard, applies a lot of pressure, is effective on the counter, and has a pretty wide array of striking. And he's a good enough athlete where Nelson's not going to be able to overrun him with his athleticism. So to a certain degree, I think it's a bad matchup for him because Joe Buen can put volume on him. And Nelson isn't the kind of guy who's really good with dealing with volume of attack, or a guy who's really physical and is going to walk him down and chop his legs up and apply steady pressure on him. That's how Rick Story beat him. And I think that Alan Jabouin, with a few modifications, because they're different fighters, can follow that blueprint to a win. And it would be a very big win for him. It announced him as a legitimate welterweight contender. Then he could start calling out the bigger names in the division, or the bigger names might want to come see him as a way to, instead of fighting 2 fights to get themselves back in a position, they might want to come right back against him and see if they can skip over 2 or 3 other guys to get closer to the title. But it's a very good matchup, because the question is Jabouin going to be able to stay off the ground completely? Because if he gets on the ground, we all know Nelson's probably going to work him over pretty good. Or is he just going to slowly chop Nelson down and beat him up over the distance of the fight? Because as I said, Nelson, the hardest thing about Nelson is his style and his timing. His actual techniques aren't executed so well or so complex that you can't figure them out. He's one of those guys who, the more looks at you and you get of him, the better you do against him. So initially, it's hard for you to get off against him because of his timing, his awkward stance, and the way he throws his shots. But as you go round after round, and the fact that he doesn't put volume on you and he's not a really fast starter, that gives you time to get into your comfort zone, to slowly ramp up the aggression and the volume, and it's kind of outwork him over the length of a fight. And I really think that's a good chance what Jabouin does. If he doesn't get too wild and run into something, I would think that he'd be able to outwork him and kind of beat him up over the length of a fight once he gets adjusted to the timing and the and the setups that he uses to get his entries.
That's some good breakdown there. That's some very good breakdown. This is probably the fight that I'm looking forward to the most on this card, because I think that Jabouin is someone that that kind of interests me. He's someone that I think the UFC can kind of mold into a future star.
He's the next model. He's the next model. He's the next model. The WME loves that, a good-looking guy who can fight.
That's true. That's true. I just know that he better not challenge anybody else to hair versus hair matches. Didn't he challenge Sage Northcutt to one? And I mean, I'm not going to front. I think that was pretty funny. But he better not do that and mess around and lose.
Yeah. I'd probably stay. I mean, just for the sake that I'm bald myself, and I wish I had his hair. It's so wonderful. Not as wonderful as Kenny Florian's hair, though, of course. But yeah, I would stay away from those. They get kind of corny, and just on the off chance you lose, man, I don't know if you want to take that kind of hit.
It's gotta go.
Yeah, you have to be a man of your word. Have to be a man of your word. So
have to be a man of your word, my friend. You have to be. Let's see what else we got. Joe Duffy and who else we got fighting this weekend too as well. We got Brad Pickett's last fight. He's finally retiring. I shouldn't say it like that, but Brad Pickett is walking away from the sport. We also got Joe Duffy and Tom Breeze. Joe and Tom are 2 prospects I'm definitely interested in, especially Tom Breeze, because he's been out there competing on the competitive grappling industry, and Duffy is Duffy was looking great. He had that fight against Poirier where a lot of people were picking him that he kind of let slip through his fingers. But other than that, he's looked good since joining the UFC. Which one of these 2 guys do you think will go further?
I've seen more Duffy, so I would say Duffy. The main issue is that he's taking care of his wrestling, because Poirier took him down left and right. and really did a good job of controlling him. And Duffy wasn't able to get sweeps or reverses. It didn't seem like he was able to. I don't know if he really even tried. It seemed like he was trying to work submissions from the top, and that's kind of the kind of mistake in the area of IQ that's really unacceptable. But I'm hoping that Faraz has kind of got his head on straight, and he's fighting under the rules and the guidelines of the sport that he's in, because a lot of guys get caught up in that I'm going to just defend and counter from the ground and submit you. And while you might be threatening with a lot of submissions, those don't always score a lot of points. And if he's going to make those kind of mistakes, he's not going to be able to get anywhere near a title fight. It's going to be a hole that people can exploit, that he's not going to try to get back up. He's not hard to take down, and then when you take him down, he's just going to try and finish you instead of trying to get back up. That's something that guys can exploit, because they know that they only have to worry about 50% of your game. I don't have to worry about holding him down. I have to worry about not getting submitted. And that's a lot easier to do when you're not worried about a guy hitting a switch on you or sweeping you and putting you in a bad position where they have the superior position and can work you over or finish you with submission. He makes it a little bit easier with that kind of stuff. The guy he's fighting is pretty much tailor-made for him, given his skill set, given his boxing, his athleticism, and his overall ground skills. This is another showcase fight for him. These are fights that are supposed to make him look good and kind of put a stamp on the performance and kind of make him more popular within the casual fans and the hardcore fans who watch MMA. This isn't really a pick-em matchup or supposed to be a close fight. If it is, then once again, that tells me more about Joe Duffy than it tells me about Joe Duffy really shouldn't be losing fights to guys of this caliber at this stage. Given the hype he's coming with and the opinion and the skills he has, he shouldn't be losing in fights like this, and he really shouldn't have too much competition in a fight like this. When you look at when you look at the fight on paper. Now, once it gets going, it could be totally different. But based on skills and physical ability, this should be a showcase fight for him that gives him an opportunity to make his name among fans once again after that loss to Poirier, which is, even though it was a while ago, it's still fresh in my mind because it was so one-sided. And I expected him to walk through Poirier, and Poirier just really beat him up and dominated him. That's the nicest way I can say it. Poirier beat him up, made it look pretty easy, except for the few tense moments earlier on the feet. He just dominated him. And Joe's got to show that he's better than that, and this is the fight that they've given him to give him the opportunity to look better than he has in the last couple fights.
Yeah, that fight was definitely tough to, like, not tough to watch in like a brutality sense, but it was definitely a fight that caught a lot of people off guard.
As a grappler, I want to know those, because I can grapple a little bit. I'm like functional more than anything else. But as a person who spends their time working in that area, do fighters not? And you fought before, so do fighters not understand how the judging system works, or how most judges see fights? Do they not understand that when they're on the bottom, just attempting these submissions, that a lot of judges aren't giving them the rounds, so they should be working on trying to create space?
That's an interesting question.
I
believe the answer is yes. People do get it. They do understand what is going on, and they do understand that they're kind of losing the match at that point. What how can I say? I don't know if they're going about it the right way in addressing it, though. I feel like some guys get really comfortable on their back, and they think that they're doing a lot and they're in good positioning and they're making a good movement, which is true. They may be doing that, but yeah, it's not that they don't understand. It's that they I don't, it's hard, man. It's very hard, because actually it's funny, because I was having a conversation as I walked out the gym tonight about lay and pray versus winning. Some people call it lay and pray. I call it winning. Just depending on what the judges may think, but more often than not, it's going to be determined winning if you're doing enough while you're on top. So I think people do just understand it, but they hope for the best, which unfortunately is too much of a risk at this point in time.
Yeah, it's just a question that keeps on going because you hear a guy will about and a lot of times I'll agree with them, but the fact of the matter is, you know how that goes 98% of the time in MMA. So why are you hanging on to this if you know your only way to win is submission? If you choose to engage on this, and just by focusing on submission, you know, it's like you made yourself predictable. It's like if you throw leg kicks without any punches. It doesn't matter how good your leg kicks are. You're going to stop landing them once they realize you're not setting up with punches. They're going to start countering you or taking you down off them because there's nothing to break their focus or to create distance or to set your kicks up. If all you're doing is going for submissions instead of getting up, I don't really have to split my focus because I'm not trying to keep you down anymore. You're keeping yourself down, trying to prove a point to submit me. But while you're doing this, I'm landing a couple shots here and there, and you guarantee the ref isn't going to stand us up because you're actively attacking me. You're just not finishing. So it's like you've essentially kept yourself from the ref standing us up, and I don't have to waste any energy holding you down. All I have to do is defend and land a couple shots here and there and escape. And I've essentially won the round. And I just never understand why guys' corners keep letting them do it or don't. You know, after we need to start addressing how to get up or create scrambles because working your guard game, unless you finish, you're going to lose the round and possibly cost yourself a fight trying to submit a guy like that. And I just see it happen so often, and I just don't understand it. The guys aren't even attempting to get to their feet. They're not even attempting to create space. They're literally engaged in a ground battle, not changing positions, fighting for submission, and changing like little incremental positions and little turns and angles. But they're not doing anything obvious enough that a judge would say, okay, hey, he's made a move that's put this guy on the defensive or put this guy in danger. And I just, this is a question I have because I see it happen so often, and guys act like they don't know that's how it works in MMA.
Yeah, it's not that they don't know. It's just that it's just I think that it's hard for them to address it in the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. Like it's just you're in the middle of it, and you're like, I'm gonna finish this guy, or I'm so close to finishing this guy. Let me just have a couple more minutes. The round's over, and you're like, oh, I didn't finish him, and he's on top of me.
Yep, and the fight's over, and I've just lost.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a little bit more sense to me then. All right. Cool.
That's kind of how it goes, man. It's an interesting conversation. I think that people they make that decision as they're getting ready for the fight, because they know that, like myself, for example, I know that that's a big part of my game. So I work on that, being able to score, points, point fighting. And then you have those guys that think that I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna put on a show for the fans, and everyone's gonna appreciate that. Yeah, they may appreciate it for those 15 minutes. But when you lose 2, 3, 4 in a row, and the UFC is telling you, we're gonna end your contract, the fans aren't going to pay for you. If the fans aren't going to pay your mortgage, they're not going to pay your car note. So you really need to be smarter about that.
Yeah, like I said, I get how it's like real life. You know things aren't fair. You know things should be another way. But even though you know the way it should be and the way it could be, the fact is you also know how it is, and you have to act accordingly. And some of these guys with the fight plan and the gestures and techniques and strategies they're using, I'm like, you're battling off what you want. You're not battling off of reality. And that's why you get in these positions where you're losing. You can't criticize the guy for playing the game smart because you refuse to. That's not his fault. That's on you. And like I said, it constantly stayed in my mind because I see it happen at least once or twice a card. You can see a guy give up position, and I'm just gonna finish him. More times than not, they lose decisions because the other guy was on top and is given credit for controlling them.
Yeah, definitely some good points there. Let's talk about some of the news that broke from this week. First and foremost, I mentioned earlier, California has released that they have passed that ruling where if you miss weight, not only are you going to get fined 20% of your show money, you get fined 20% of your win money as well, which I think is very interesting because it helps deal with that situation where so many guys were and they were missing weight and kind of not caring. Like I look back to that fight between Will Brooks and Charles Oliveira, where Oliveira came in so heavy, but it definitely affected the way the fight went down, and allowing that win. Which yeah, he lost, but he um he lost, but at the same time, he didn't lose. So, what do you think about this change
Yeah,
in the rule set?
I'm kind of. I mean, I think it's a good move. I saw that when I heard about the Oliveira Will Brooks thing. In my mind, I was thinking he shouldn't take the fight. He should take it because of the money and the fact that he had a win. He thought he could put another win together. But in situations like that, where in my opinion, a guy is purposely not trying to make weight so they have a physical advantage, because like I said before on the show, the UFC doesn't think you're doing them a favor. They think you're doing your job when you take a short notice fight. So they're not going to give you any credit or backdoor bonuses because you took a fight for them. They're like, hey, if you win, it helps your career too. So we're not doing any favors for you. I didn't think you should have taken that fight, and I thought that weight difference and how he's able to manhandle Brooks and essentially defend this as a much better wrestler and fighter in the clinch as far as the grappling. He was able to neutralize that because he was just too big and too strong, and he was comfortable because he had no intention of making the weight. So having a financial component being there help, but in a certain degree, if the guy's still bigger than you and he's did that on purpose, your career there can be a you as a result of that because he's going to be so much
Hmm.
bigger and stronger. So I mean, if you take the fight and you get a little bit more of his money, but you lose, asterisk over him because he didn't make weight. But the way the UFC works, it's still going to get him a better fight because he still beat you. It seems like they want guys who can get attention, and you can even evoke negative attention from fans. They think you're a cheater and you miss weight on purpose and you're a dirty fighter. Even though that's negative attention, that's still attention. That's still clicks. That's still eyes on you. There's still people tuning in from the fans. And WME needs guys who can get reactions and draw eyes and make people care about their fights, whether it's for a positive reason or a negative reason. So in a certain kind of way, that actually helps you too. A lot of times when guys miss weights, I think you should just skip the fight. Take your show money and just go home. I don't know that it's worth it,
Definitely.
especially depending on the kind of fighter is. I mean, Will Brooks for a while because he had a rib injury, if I recall correctly. So not only did he lose money on that fight,
Yeah.
how much money did he lose in the fact that he could have had another 2 fights in the meantime? He has to rehab. He has to wait to get back in the gym. Then he has to, he has gym fees, other expenses. So it's actually cost him money because he got injured in the fight. It would have been better just to take your show money and say, I'm not going to fight, or find me a guy who can make weight and I'll fight him myself like that because it was the worst of best thing could happen. He lost the fight and he got injured, which means he couldn't another fight quickly because he wasn't really beat up. He just broke his rib or bruised his rib and he couldn't compete moving forward. So he's had to sit out, and that's he made because of Oliveira missing weight. It didn't really balance out.
Yeah, it was a bad situation for everyone around, especially for well, it was a bad situation for everyone not named Charles Oliveira there. Let's look at another story, man. This is one that was not on our format for this week, but I'm definitely want to talk about it. Lorenz Larkin is signed with Bellator. It looks like the organization is making moves, man. They brought in a new, yes, fresh new talent. I think Dennis is 24. Doesn't have any MMA experience, but he can definitely talk his way into a situation, and he's Conor McGregor's training partner. So there's that. That's going to add to the whole dynamic. But what do you think about these two big signings?
I think Larkin's a really good pickup. I mean, Larkin in his last fight beat Jorge Masvidal, and I'm sure Jorge will say that he won the fight and they didn't notice all the things he did because that's what he usually says when he loses. But the fact of the matter is, Lorenz Larkin has a win over the UFC's hottest fighter. Right? Lorenz Larkin is the legitimate talent, athletically and as far as his skills on the feet. I mean, he's not great on the ground, but he's good enough, and he was a ranked fighter. This is a really good pickup for him because he's not
Which guy are you talking about? The hottest fighter right now?
Jorge Masvidal.
Oh yeah,
Donald
yeah, yeah.
Cerrone now he's in all sorts of title fight talks now. I mean, if he beats he beats Maya, he might just be either one step away from a title fight or right in one, just like that, just off for beating Cowboy. But I think the Lorenz Larkin signing is a great one because he's not a big name. He's not a. I'm sure they had to pay him, but he's not like a Benson Henderson or a guy who's kind of been around for a really long time in his career. He's still in the midst of his career and still in his physical prime. Guy who helps create all sorts of different matchups. I mean, he could fight Korshikov, he could fight Lima, he could fight McDonald, he could fight MVP. Like there's just a lot of, because of his style, he can move in a lot of different directions. And their welterweight division is actually looking, at least at the top end, is looking pretty good given all the guys they have. All those guys I just named will be top guys in their welterweight division. That's comparable talent to whatever the UFC has right now, if you think about it. Lorenz has already beaten Gamebred. Was the last guy who decisively beat Tyron Woodley.
I thought he lost. Wait, you said who's the last guy to beat Tyron Woodley?
Roy McDonald, if I recall correctly. I don't think he's lost since then. I think that was his last loss in the UFC.
Right. That's true. That's right.
You have one guy who's beat the champion, another guy who's beat a top contender, hottest fighter in division. Dale would do great things in the welterweight division, but he'd still be considered one of the better welterweights in the world. He'd be ranked in the UFC. And Lima and Korshikov they're just not facing UFC level opposition, but they're UFC level talent based on what I've seen of them. They're all young guys, so I think it's a good move for them to have such an important in a division that's constantly compared to the UFC's division, to have it filled with a bunch of young guys. That's a good look because Tyron Woodley's not super young. Robbie Lawler isn't young at all. Carlos Condit might not be coming back.
Tyron's what, 34?
Yeah, Tyron's not really young. Stephen Thompson's not super young either. Robbie Lawler's not young. Damian Maia's not young. If they can kind of build, if Bellator can bring in more middle class level welterweights, some guys with some skills and some experience, instead of just these lower tier guys they have competing now, they might really be able to build a division and overshadow the UFC's welterweight division because they have all young guys, for the most part, who should be under 30, except McDonald's under 32. I think.
Yeah, McDonald's young. I think he's young. He's just been doing this for so long.
Yeah, so I mean that's a really good look for him. You have a bunch of young contenders. You just need not forcing fights before they're ready. You give guys a chance to acclimate. You give guys a chance to kind of build up their fan base and build up some excitement for the fights instead of just throwing guys in right away. It would be much bigger if it was made 6 months to a year down the line. Bellator's only problem, but right now, as far as the top talent in their welterweight division, in the UFC, in some cases, those guys have beat the guys from the UFC recently. Good signing. I was hoping that he would go there, and I think it's a really good signing. I don't know much about Dylan Dennis. I mean, I know he's so it's a move that gets attention because he's kind of adopted Conor McGregor's trash talk. He called out John Jones for a grappling contest. He says he can tap anybody. That brings a lot. That's going to bring a certain segment of fans into him, and jiu-jitsu player. That's going to bring in a certain segment of people who want to see him do well, not necessarily because they like him, but because he represents jiu-jitsu. I still don't know that. At least in his first couple fights, he should draw some eyes. And usually Bellator's talent level, they have enough guys where he can kind of fight his way a little bit before they put him in with anybody who's really legitimate. The only concern I have is they might move him up too fast, and he's enough for them to throw him in with anybody who's a real threat at this stage. I think he probably needs a good year or two before he's ready to face legitimate competition, in my opinion. As good as he is on the ground, offer on the feet, or once you throw strikes into these ground circumstances. So I think he needs at least a year or two before they start who's a real threat, in my opinion, but we'll see what they decide to do with him.
Yeah, I think it is a pretty interesting move to see how they kind of welcome him in to the sport of MMA. But I still think it's interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing him fight. He's supposed to fight his first fight later on this year. And I think he's actually grappling this weekend in the Pan American Championships, and I think he has the opportunity to win it. I think he has some big fights going in front of him. It's going to be a hell of a show, and I can't wait to watch it. It actually started today. Go ahead.
Is it hard to balance that? Is it hard to balance that? Like,
Say that again.
I mean, I know the two arts are different, but is it hard to balance that to be grapple at that high level and then still be trying to find your way in MMA? I mean, isn't that kind of counterproductive? Couldn't that develop some habits that won't translate over well?
This is kind of a controversial topic in a sense because I've talked about this. Um, Grappling, doing strictly jujitsu and transitioning to MMA and then trying to go back does hurt your game. There's so many examples of guys who don't make the transition back to high level grappling. Like that's why I think this is reasons why, like for example, Damian Maia. Damian Maia has never tried to do the two dance thing. Jacare, he's never done the two dance thing where you're doing one and trying to do the other. Andre Galvao tried to do both, and that's when Tyron really put him out. Mackenzie Dern, she's trying to do both, and she's been struggling in her as she kind of fights for legacy and fights for some of the smaller shows.
Yeah,
So I do believe in the idea that MMA does create some bad habits for your game if you are trying to do competitive grappling and vice versa. For example, in MMA, I think you're more prone to sit in some positions that you wouldn't sit in competitive grappling. Just have the safety of being able to disrupt your opponent's offense with strikes, and vice versa. In competitive grappling, you may find yourself sitting in positions where you can get swept or submitted just because you thought you were safe, as you would be when it comes to MMA. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I think it's very difficult to go back and forth. I think the better strategy is to find success in one, then dedicate yourself to finding success in the other, and maybe you go back and forth between the two at that point. Once you've found that legit recognized success in both areas, but I think it's going to be very difficult to find all the success in both at the same time.
yeah. I mean, I know in the case of him, and I'm hearing he makes a lot of money for doing these seminars and competing. But I'm like, at some level, doing that seminar, getting ready for that competition, takes away from the stuff you're doing in MMA. You're focusing too much on that, and your mind has to be in a different mode for that. It's like if Conor McGregor was training for MMA and training for boxing. That's not going to work. You balance the two. And I just keep wondering if some of these guys are doing more harm than MMA, and you get knocked out or beat up a lot of times. That doesn't necessarily carry over to your jiu-jitsu reputation. But if you take enough damage, you might not recover mentally or physically to the point where you can still be a world-class jiu-jitsu or judoka or whatever it is that you're doing. You just might not recover. Lots of guys take beatings and they don't seem to be the same, the fighter. And I would think if you take a particularly tough beating in MMA, you try to go back to jiu-jitsu, you might not have that same athleticism. You might not have that same comfort, or you might just develop injuries in training that keep you from being a world-class grappler again. Essentially shortcut yourself in both elements.
That's very true. Very true there, sir. So let's talk about what you got going on for the site this week. And I saw your piece up this week. What other things are you working on?
I've been working the piece you were speaking of was part 2 of the problem with Bellator. And like I said last week, it just kind of discussed how Bellator is kind of making into becoming an actual competitor to the UFC. There's a difference between being a competitor and an alternative. An alternative is on the UFC that I don't want to, that's kind of boring, so I'll just check out Bellator. Being an actual competitor is you're like, man, dude, do I want to watch this match on Bellator or do I want to watch this one on the UFC? This is a hard competition. This is a hard decision because the level of fighting and the level of the cards and the names are so comparable. And Bellator hasn't really had that. They've had it at the top and they haven't had it anywhere else. But recently they've been making those moves and they've been putting themselves in positions where a lot of fighters are going to have to start considering them as an option instead of going to the UFC, whether it's because of weight divisions it's because the UFC is no sponsorship thing, or it's just a matter of opportunities you want because you're not a big enough name. People are going to have to start looking at Bellator Fighting Championships as a legitimate alternative, as a legitimate option, instead of just saying I'm going to go to the UFC. I think that ship's starting to sail. It's no longer just the UFC and everybody else. I'm thinking it's starting to be Bellator and everybody else. The other piece I'm working on. I'm actually working on a Weidman, kind of addressing in the room that nobody wants to talk about. That racism is actually the reason why he's hit the recently. Not that he's gotten any worse strategically or technically, lacks a certain level of athleticism, and when he started facing guys in their prime, extent of their physical abilities, he didn't look nearly as dominant, poised, and in control as he did when he's beating up on guys on the decline. To give it a taste of the point I'm making, look at Weidman versus Machida, Weidman versus Romero, Weidman versus Belfort. Near the same fighter. And I understand there's different skill sets, but I'm talking about how he reacted when put in certain situations, how he reacted when a guy hit him, how he reacted when he put his hands on one guy, manhandle, put his hands on another guy, started getting frustrated, started fighting sloppy. And the main difference in between the guys he fought before and the guys he fought now, these guys have it. They're close to their primes. These other guys are far away from their primes and don't have it. And that makes a big difference in any sort of sport. As you know, football, basketball, boxing, soccer, when you have the better athlete, even if you have the better skill set, because that athleticism gives you such an advantage. Just watch the last UFC Fight Night. How many fights on that card were just determined that a more skilled, more seasoned guy fighting the right fight lost to an opponent who was just a better athlete, bigger, stronger, faster, more dynamic. 4 times on that card.
Good, some good insight there. I'm looking forward. I hope Bellator does become a legit option, a counter to UFC, because having competition is always best for all parties involved. I just think that's the direction that we need to go in.
Yeah, it's better for the fans. It's better for the fighters. They can talk to you and treat you any way they want because you have nowhere to go. And as fans, you have to put up with whatever cards and whatever they produce for you because you have nowhere else to go. Once there's a competitor, people have to step their game up. As long as there's thought of as we're not worried about it. Once there's competition, okay, well now we got to start giving them the good stuff because we don't want to lose it. We don't want to fall behind these guys. We don't want to start losing money, losing free agents, or losing pay-per-view buys or ratings because we're just throwing whatever we have out there, and they're constantly bringing fire every time they put out a main card.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely very true there, sir. So let's look at what I have coming up. I'm covering PANS. I'm covering NCAA Championship Wrestling this week. I have another piece about the lightweight division coming out probably tomorrow. So yeah, there's quite a bit of things going on. We have the fight card this weekend, which I may or may not skip. Just saying, to be honest. And we will be back for another showcase next week to talk competitive grappling. Just talk about not competitive, to talk about MMA and probably recap some of the things from this past weekend. I look forward to next weekend's card. What is it? UFC Fight UFC 210, 209.
No, 209 was the week before last. No,
yeah, so it's 210.
It'll be 210, yeah.
Yeah, so we have that. And who's main eventing that one? Is that the man? You see how crazy this has gotten? I've forgotten everything. Who's main eventing that?
Who's main eventing is going to be DC versus Johnson.
Oh yeah, okay. So there's that. But that is in 2 weeks, and we will be back to talk about that and everything else going on.
It won't be the big
card of MMA.
Unfortunately, that's not going to be the big. They're looking for 500,000 buys, and these aren't the guys who are going to get it for you, unfortunately.
Yeah, these are not the guy. These are not the guys to get it for you. So with that in mind, go ahead.
I said it's always it's a pleasure talking to you and all the fans who support us and support the pieces we do. We're going to keep on giving you our best efforts and doing our best in the future, like doing more interviews and taking different looks at the MMA. We're just not going to be stuck in the analysis fight thing. We're going to talk about all aspects of it. And just for fans, if you have any questions you want on the show, hashtag MMA Ratings. We'll answer the show. We'll answer any and all questions on the show you have for us.
Definitely, we definitely support all of the love that you guys send us and all of the just even like the views, the likes, the comments. We appreciate all of it, except for that idiot whose comments I had to delete a few weeks back. But I'm not even going to give that guy any more shine than that. He knows who he
Yeah,
is.
all the real fans, we appreciate you and thank you for showing your support and everything. Do our best to live up to the support, and we're going to keep giving you good shows, keep giving you good content. And like I said, you have any questions or comments, let us know. We're here for you, and we're going to do our very best for you.
Awesome, guys. Have a great night, everyone. Have a good night, Schwan.
All right, take it easy.